The sound of a leather belt cracking against skin echoed through the saloon, silencing every piano key and whiskey glass in Rattlesnake Gulch. Ruby Everett stumbled backward, her hand instinctively touching the red welt forming across her cheek, her eyes defiant despite the tears threatening to spill. Everyone watched, frozen in their spots, as Silas Thornton's face twisted with rage and his arm raised again, the belt dangling menacingly from his meaty fist. "I don't care if you're promised to the mayor's nephew," Silas snarled. "When I ask a woman to dance, she dances." The year was 1878, and in the dusty Wyoming Territory town of Rattlesnake Gulch, men like Silas Thornton were accustomed to getting their way. Ruby had only been working at the Silver Dollar Saloon for 3 weeks, serving drinks to pay off her late father's debts. At 22, she'd already seen more than her fair share of hardship, but she'd never been struck before, not by her father, not by any man. Before Silas could swing again, a tall figure materialized behind him, catching his wrist mid-air with a grip that made Thornton wince. "I reckon he won't raise that hand again," came a low, steady voice that seemed to fill the room despite its quietness. "Not against her. Not against anyone in this establishment." Quinn Garrett stood a head taller than Thornton, his lean frame deceptively strong beneath his worn duster. The dust from the trail still clung to his boots, and the brim of his hat cast a shadow over piercing blue eyes. He wasn't from Rattlesnake Gulch, that much was clear to everyone watching. "This ain't your business, stranger," Thornton spat, trying to wrench his arm free. Quinn's grip only tightened. "You made it my business when you struck a lady who clearly told you no." The saloon held its collective breath. Thornton was the foreman at the Lazy S Ranch, with 5 ranch hands seated at a nearby table. Quinn stood alone, a stranger who'd ridden into town just hours earlier. "Boys," Thornton called to his men, "looks like we need to teach this drifter some manners." Ruby found her voice. "Stop it, Silas. There's been enough trouble." The saloon owner, a portly man named Hiram, stepped forward nervously. "Now, gentlemen, I won't have any more commotion in my establishment. Mr. Thornton, perhaps it's time you and your boys called it a night." Thornton glared at Quinn, then at Ruby. "This ain't over," he muttered, yanking his arm free and adjusting his vest with exaggerated dignity. He nodded to his men, and they all stood, chairs scraping against the wooden floor. "Mayor Thompson's gonna hear about this and about his nephew's intended consorting with drifters." After they left, the saloon slowly returned to its normal hum of activity, though many curious eyes remained fixed on Quinn and Ruby. "Thank you," Ruby said quietly, touching her cheek where the welt was now bright red. "But you shouldn't have interfered. Silas Thornton is a powerful man in these parts." Quinn's expression softened as he looked at her injury. "No man has the right to raise his hand to a woman, no matter how powerful he thinks he is." He gestured to a nearby chair. "May I?" Ruby nodded, and they both sat down. Hiram brought over 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey without being asked. "On the house," the saloon owner said, looking gratefully at Quinn. "Ruby's a good girl. Been nothing but trouble since Thornton took a shine to her." As Hiram walked away, Quinn poured a small amount of whiskey into a clean handkerchief and offered it to Ruby. "For the sting," he explained. Ruby accepted it with a small smile and pressed it gently to her cheek. "I'm Ruby Everett." "Quinn Garrett," he replied, pouring a finger of whiskey into each glass. "Just passing through on my way to Montana Territory." "Well, Mr. Garrett, your timing is fortunate, but I'm afraid you may have just bought yourself a heap of trouble." She took a small sip from her glass, wincing at both the alcohol and the pain in her cheek. "Silas wasn't lying about the mayor's nephew. I'm promised to him." Quinn studied her face. "You don't seem particularly happy about that arrangement." Ruby's green eyes met his, and for a moment, she let her guard down. "It wasn't my choice. My father died 3 months ago with substantial debts. Mayor Thompson offered to clear them if I would marry his nephew, Elliot." "And this Elliot, he approves of men striking his future wife?" Ruby glanced down. Elliot is weak-willed. He does whatever his uncle tells him. I've only met him twice, and he barely spoke 10 words to me. The piano player had resumed his cheerful tune, and the saloon was filling with tobacco smoke and laughter again, as if the earlier incident had been forgotten. But Ruby knew better. In a town like Rattlesnake Gulch, nothing was forgotten. "Where are you staying tonight, Mr. Garrett?" she asked. "Haven't decided yet. Just arrived this afternoon." Ruby nodded toward the staircase. "Hiram has rooms upstairs. After what you did, I think he'd give you a fair price." She lowered her voice. "But you should consider leaving at first light. Thornton won't let this go." Quinn took a slow sip of his whiskey. "I've never been one to run from trouble, Miss Everett." "Then you might be in for a long night," Ruby warned, rising from her chair. "I need to get back to work before Hiram docks my pay." As she walked away, Quinn couldn't help but notice the grace with which she moved, despite the weight of her circumstances. There was something about Ruby Everett that made him think twice about his plans to leave town so quickly. The following morning, Quinn was saddling his horse outside the livery stable when he heard the commotion. A woman's desperate pleas cut through the early morning air, followed by angry male voices. He secured his saddle and strode quickly toward the sound, which was coming from behind the general store. Ruby was pressed against the wall, her market basket overturned at her feet. Silas Thornton stood before her, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. The belt was in his hand again. "Thought your drifter friend could protect you? He'll be long gone by now," Thornton was saying, his voice thick with malice. "And once I'm done with you, that pretty face won't be catching any more drifters' eyes." Quinn's hand moved to his holster. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Thornton." All 3 men turned, surprise evident on their faces. Thornton's expression quickly morphed into a sneer. "Well, look who's still in town. Boys, I believe I promised this man a lesson in manners." The 2 ranch hands moved toward Quinn, but he stood his ground, eyes locked on Thornton. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I meant what I said yesterday. You won't raise that hand against her again." The first ranch hand lunged, but Quinn was ready. He sidestepped the attack and delivered a swift punch that sent the man sprawling in the dirt. The second man was more cautious, circling before throwing a punch that Quinn blocked before countering with a solid blow to the man's midsection. Thornton, seeing his men so easily dispatched, reached for his gun. Quinn was faster, drawing and aiming in one fluid motion. "Don't," Quinn warned, his voice deadly calm. Thornton froze, his hand hovering above his holster. "Now drop the belt," Quinn ordered. After a moment's hesitation, Thornton let the belt fall to the ground. "Good. Now here's what's going to happen," Quinn continued. "You're going to walk away and leave Miss Everett alone. Permanently." Thornton's face contorted with rage. "You can't stay in town forever, Garrett. And neither of you will be welcome here once Mayor Thompson hears about this." "Then I suggest you go tell him," Quinn replied coolly. "I'd like to meet the man who thinks it's acceptable to promise a woman to his nephew like she's a piece of property." After Thornton and his men slunk away, Quinn holstered his gun and turned to Ruby, who was gathering the spilled items from her basket. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling to help her. Ruby shook her head, but her hands were trembling. "You should have left town, Mr. Garrett." "And leave you to deal with that snake alone?" "Not likely." He picked up a bruised apple and placed it gently in her basket. "Is there somewhere safe you can stay? Family or friends?" "I have a room above the saloon," Ruby said, "but nowhere else to go. My father's farm was sold to pay his debts." Quinn stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Then I suggest you gather your things. We're leaving Rattlesnake Gulch." Ruby stared at him in disbelief. "Leaving? I can't just leave. I have obligations, debts." "Debts that were settled when you agreed to marry a man you've barely met," Quinn pointed out. "A man who's done nothing to protect you from Thornton's advances." Ruby's expression hardened. And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Garrett? That I run away with a man I met yesterday? How does that make you any different from the mayor or Thornton? Quinn's face softened. I'm proposing to take you to the next town, where you can make your own decisions without threats hanging over your head. After that, you're free to go wherever you choose. Ruby studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she sighed. You don't understand. If I leave, the mayor will send the sheriff after us. He'll claim I stole from him or some other false charge. Then we'll deal with that when it comes, Quinn said with a confidence that was hard to dismiss. But right now, we need to go. Thornton's pride won't let this stand. He'll be back with more men. After a moment's hesitation, Ruby nodded. Give me 15 minutes to pack my things. True to her word, Ruby was ready in under 15 minutes, carrying a small carpet bag with her meager possessions. They met at the livery stable, where Quinn had already paid for a second horse. It's not much, he said, gesturing to the bay mare, but she's sure-footed and has good stamina. Ruby stroked the mare's nose. She's beautiful, but I can't accept. Consider it a loan, Quinn interrupted, until you're settled somewhere safe. As they rode out of town, Ruby couldn't help but glance back at the dusty street and weathered buildings of Rattlesnake Gulch. For all its harshness, it had been her home for her entire life. Her parents were buried in the small cemetery on the hill, and until 3 months ago, she'd never imagined leaving. Having second thoughts? Quinn asked, noticing her backward glance. Ruby straightened in her saddle. No, there's nothing for me there now. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, following the old stage road toward the neighboring town of Copper Creek. The Wyoming landscape spread out before them, vast and beautiful, with the distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop to the rolling prairie. May I ask what takes you to Montana Territory? Ruby finally asked, as they stopped to rest the horses by a small creek. Quinn removed his hat and dipped it into the cool water, wetting his face and neck. I have a parcel of land near Helena. Been working on it for a few years, building a ranch. Alone? A shadow passed over Quinn's features. I had a partner. My brother. He died last winter pneumonia. I'm sorry, Ruby said softly. It's hard losing family. Quinn nodded, acknowledging her empathy. I came south to buy some breeding stock. Found a good deal near Denver. And I was on my way back when I stopped in your town. Ruby watched as he refilled their canteens. There was an efficiency to his movements that spoke of a man accustomed to taking care of himself and others. And now, you're saddled with a runaway bride. Quinn's mouth quirked into a smile. I've had worse traveling companions. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a sheltered hollow near the creek. Quinn built a small fire while Ruby prepared a simple meal from the provisions they'd purchased before leaving town. We should reach Copper Creek by midday tomorrow, Quinn said as they ate. It's larger than Rattlesnake Gulch. You might find work there if you want to stay. Ruby stared into the flames. And if I don't want to stay? Quinn looked at her across the fire, the golden light illuminating the determined set of her jaw and the quiet strength in her eyes. Then you decide where you want to go next. I told you once you're safe, you're free to choose your own path. Even if that path led to Montana? Ruby asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Quinn's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly. Even then. Though I should warn you, my ranch is far from finished. It's no place for someone used to town living. Ruby laughed softly. Mr. Garrett, I grew up on a farm. I can milk cows, mend fences, and plow a straight furrow. I'm not afraid of hard work. I don't doubt that for a second, Miss Everett. They fell into silence again, but it was a comfortable one, filled with possibilities neither was ready to voice aloud. Morning broke clear and cold, with frost glistening on the prairie grass. They were just finishing a breakfast of coffee and cornbread when Quinn suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his holster. Riders coming, he said quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. At least 5, moving fast. Ruby's heart sank as she followed his gaze. Even from a distance she could recognize Silas Thornton's distinctive black hat. It's them. How did they find us so quickly? Doesn't matter, Quinn said, already dousing the fire and gathering their belongings. We need to move, now. They mounted quickly, but instead of continuing along the stage road, Quinn led them toward a rocky outcropping to the west. The road to Copper Creek is faster, Ruby protested. And exactly where they'd expect us to go, Quinn replied. Trust me, I know these hills. For the next 2 hours, they rode hard, Quinn choosing paths that would be difficult to follow across rocky ground where hooves left little trace, through shallow streams that would wash away their tracks, and along ridgelines where they could spot pursuit. Ruby, who had rarely ventured far from Rattlesnake Gulch, was amazed at Quinn's knowledge of the terrain. By midday, there was no sign of Thornton and his men, and they allowed themselves a brief rest in a hidden valley dotted with aspen trees. The horses grazed on the fresh grass while Quinn and Ruby shared the last of their water and jerky. You seem to know this area well for someone just passing through, Ruby observed. Quinn nodded. I worked as a scout for the Army a few years back. Spent a lot of time in these hills tracking Arapaho and Cheyenne. Is that how you learned to handle yourself in a fight? That came earlier, Quinn admitted. My father was a bare-knuckle boxer back east before he brought us west. He taught me and my brother everything he knew. Ruby studied him with new interest. You're full of surprises, Mr. Garrett. As are you, Miss Everett. Not many women would have the courage to leave everything behind on a moment's notice. Ruby's expression grew somber. When you have nothing left to lose, it's not courage, it's survival. Quinn was about to respond when the distant crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. A bullet kicked up dirt just feet from where they sat. Run! Quinn shouted, pulling Ruby to her feet as another shot rang out. They sprinted for the horses, bullets peppering the ground around them. Quinn boosted Ruby onto her mare before swinging up onto his own horse. They galloped toward the tree line at the far end of the valley, zigzagging to make themselves harder targets. Just as they reached the shelter of the trees, Ruby cried out, clutching her upper arm. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining her sleeve dark red. You're hit, Quinn said, his voice tight with concern as they continued riding deeper into the forest. It's just a graze, Ruby insisted, though her face had paled considerably. Quinn led them through the dense forest until they came to a narrow ravine with a small cave hidden behind a cascade of vines. He helped Ruby dismount and led the horses into the natural shelter before tending to her wound. The bullet had indeed only grazed her, but it was a deep furrow that bled freely. Quinn cleaned it as gently as possible with water from their canteen and a strip of clean cloth from his saddlebag. This needs stitching, he said grimly. Ruby nodded, her jaw set. Do what you have to do. From his saddlebag, Quinn produced a small leather pouch containing needle, thread, and a flask of whiskey. He handed her the flask first. Drink. It'll help with the pain. Ruby took a long swallow, coughing slightly as the liquor burned its way down her throat. Quinn sterilized the needle with the flame from a match, then poured some of the whiskey over the wound. Ruby bit her lip to keep from crying out. I'm sorry, Quinn murmured as he began to stitch the wound closed. His hands were surprisingly gentle for a man of his size and strength. Ruby focused on his face to distract herself from the pain. In the dim light of the cave, his features seemed softer, the hard lines of his jaw and the weathered creases around his eyes giving way to an expression of tender concentration. His hands moved with practiced precision, each stitch placed with care. Where did you learn to do this? Ruby asked through gritted teeth. Army scouts often had to tend their own wounds in the field, Quinn replied, his voice soft. And my brother was thrown from a horse once, split his head open. Nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away. When he finished, Quinn bound the wound with a clean bandage, his fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on her arm. "Thank you," Ruby said, acutely aware of his proximity. Quinn met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the strange circumstances that had brought them together and the growing connection neither had anticipated. The moment was broken by the distant sound of voices. Thornton and his men were still searching for them. "We need to stay put until dark," Quinn whispered. "Then we can slip away." As they waited, huddled together in the small cave, Ruby found herself drawing strength from Quinn's steady presence. Despite the danger surrounding them, she felt safer than she had in months. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You could have continued on your way after that first night in the saloon. None of this concerns you." Quinn was silent for so long that Ruby thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke. "When I was 14, I watched my father beat my mother for talking to another man. It was the only time he ever raised his hand to her, but I'll never forget the sound of his belt or the look in her eyes." His voice was low, controlled, but Ruby could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I swore then that I would never stand by and watch a woman be mistreated. Not if I could stop it." "What happened to your parents?" Ruby asked gently. "My mother died from fever a year later. My father drank himself to death by the time I was 20. Quinn's expression softened as he looked at her. "But I didn't help you because of my past, Ruby. I helped you because it was the right thing to do." The way he said her name, it was the first time he'd called her Ruby, instead of Miss Everett, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the close confines of the cave. Night fell, and the voices of their pursuers faded as Thornton and his men made camp some distance away. Under cover of darkness, Quinn and Ruby led their horses silently through the forest, giving the enemy camp a wide berth before rejoining the trail to Copper Creek. They rode through the night, stopping only when the horses needed rest. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the prairie, Quinn pointed to a column of smoke on the horizon. "Copper Creek," he said. "We should reach it by mid-morning." Ruby nodded, but her expression was troubled. "What happens when we get there? Thornton won't give up easily, and the mayor has influence beyond Rattlesnake Gulch." Quinn considered her words. "We could telegraph the territorial marshal, report what happened. Assault is still a crime, even in Wyoming territory." "It would be my word against his," Ruby pointed out, "and the mayor would back Thornton's version of events." Quinn frowned. "Then maybe Copper Creek isn't far enough. We could continue north into Montana." Ruby studied his face. "Are you inviting me to accompany you to your ranch, Mr. Garrett?" "It would be the safest place for you," Quinn said carefully. "At least until this blows over." "And then what?" Ruby asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Quinn's gaze held hers. "Then whatever you want, Ruby. I meant what I said. Your life is your own to choose." As they rode into Copper Creek, the town was bustling with morning activity. Unlike Rattlesnake Gulch, which had grown haphazardly around its silver mine, Copper Creek was a planned community with a proper main street, a courthouse, and even a small school. They stopped first at the doctor's office to have Ruby's wound properly cleaned and bandaged. The doctor, a kindly older man named Peterson, asked few questions but gave Quinn a knowing look when he explained they'd had trouble with some unsavory characters on the road. "You wouldn't be the first folks to run into bandits in these parts," Dr. Peterson said mildly. "The lady's fortunate to have such a capable protector." From the doctor's office, they went to the general store to replenish their supplies. As Quinn was paying for their purchases, Ruby noticed a telegram messenger enter and speak quietly to the store owner, who glanced in their direction with sudden interest. "Quinn," she said quietly, "I think word may have reached Copper Creek about us." Quinn followed her gaze to the store owner, who was now whispering to another customer. Time to go, he agreed, gathering their supplies. They had just reached their horses when the town sheriff, flanked by 2 deputies, approached them. "Mr. Garrett? Miss Everett?" the sheriff called. "I'd like a word with you both." Quinn stepped slightly in front of Ruby, his hand near his holster. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" The sheriff, a grizzled man with a thick mustache, held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "That depends on your side of the story. I've received a telegraph from Rattlesnake Gulch claiming Miss Everett here has fled with stolen property, and that you, sir, assaulted several men." "That's a lie," Ruby said indignantly. "I took nothing but my own belongings, and Mr. Garrett acted only in my defense after I was assaulted." The sheriff studied them both. "Why don't we continue this conversation in my office, away from curious eyes?" In the sheriff's office, Quinn and Ruby told their story: how Thornton had struck Ruby with a belt, how Quinn had intervened, and how Thornton had later attempted to attack Ruby again, leading to their hasty departure from town. "And this Mayor Thompson claims your promise to his nephew?" the sheriff asked Ruby. "An arrangement made under duress," Ruby explained. "My father died in debt to the bank, which the mayor controls. He offered to clear the debts if I would marry his nephew." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, while distasteful, such arrangements aren't illegal, and without witnesses to corroborate your account of Thornton's attack." "So you're going to send us back?" Quinn asked, his voice hardening. "I didn't say that," the sheriff replied. "I have no love for Rattlesnake Gulch or its politics. Mayor Thompson has been using his position to control that town for years." He leaned back in his chair. "But I can't ignore an official communication either." Ruby and Quinn exchanged worried glances. "However," the sheriff continued, "I can't very well detain folks based on hearsay, especially when the accused presents such a compelling counter-narrative." He stood up. "I suggest you two continue on your journey without delay. It would be at least a day before I could organize any official response to Rattlesnake Gulch's request." Quinn's expression relaxed slightly. "Thank you, Sheriff." The sheriff nodded. "Just one piece of advice: if I were heading north, I might consider taking the western trail through the mountains. It's longer, but less traveled. Less chance of running into anyone from Rattlesnake Gulch who might be following the main road." They took the sheriff's advice, departing Copper Creek immediately and taking the western mountain trail. For 3 days they traveled through some of the most beautiful country Ruby had ever seen: towering pine forests, crystal-clear mountain lakes, and meadows bursting with wildflowers. Despite the circumstances, Ruby found herself enjoying the journey. Quinn was a thoughtful traveling companion, sharing stories of his time as a scout and teaching her survival skills she'd never needed in town. In the evenings, they would make camp early, and Quinn would point out constellations as they sat by the fire. "That one there is Cassiopeia," he said on their 3rd night, pointing to a distinctive W shape in the sky. "The queen who boasted of her beauty." Ruby smiled. "My father taught me a few constellations, but not many. He was more concerned with stars as navigation aids than their stories." "My mother loved the myths," Quinn explained. "She'd tell them to me and my brother on summer nights when it was too hot to sleep indoors." "She sounds like a wonderful woman," Ruby said softly. Quinn nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "She was strong, kind, and smarter than anyone gave her credit for." He looked at Ruby. "She would have liked you." The simple statement warmed Ruby more than the fire before them. Over the past days, she'd come to admire Quinn deeply: his quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass, the gentleness that belied his imposing presence. And though neither had spoken of it, she sensed that his feelings for her had grown as well. "How much further to your ranch?" she asked, changing the subject before her thoughts became too evident on her face. "Another week, maybe less if the weather holds," Quinn replied. "It's in a valley near the Missouri River, good water and grazing land. the cabin's solid 2 rooms with a stone fireplace. Ruby could hear the pride in his voice. "You love it there." "It's home," Quinn said simply. "Or it will be, once it's finished." "What does it need?" Ruby asked, genuinely curious. Quinn laughed softly. "Everything. Fences, a barn, more cattle, maybe some crops." His expression grew more serious. "A family to make it worth all the work." Their eyes met across the fire, and this time, neither looked away. The connection between them, which had been building since that first night in the saloon, seemed to solidify into something tangible. "Ruby," Quinn began, but was interrupted by a distant sound that made them both stiffen. Hoofbeats, approaching fast. "Douse the fire," Quinn whispered, already reaching for his rifle. They moved quickly, Ruby kicking dirt over the flames while Quinn led the horses deeper into the trees. Within minutes, they were hidden in a dense thicket, watching the trail through the darkness. 5 riders appeared, moving slowly as they scanned the area. Even in the moonlight, Ruby recognized Silas Thornton at the lead. "They must have picked up our trail in Copper Creek," Quinn whispered. "The sheriff couldn't hold them off." "Or someone else reported seeing us," Ruby suggested. "The doctor or the store owner." They watched in tense silence as Thornton dismounted and examined the remains of their campfire. "Still warm," they heard him call to his men. "They can't be far. Spread out and search the area. I want them found before dawn." As the men fanned out, Quinn turned to Ruby. "We need to move now. Stay low and follow me." They crept through the underbrush, leading their horses by the reins, moving as silently as possible away from the searching men. Quinn's experience as a scout proved invaluable as he chose a path that minimized sound while keeping them concealed. They had nearly reached the edge of the forest when a shout went up behind them. "Over here! I found tracks!" "Run!" Quinn urged, helping Ruby onto her horse before mounting his own. They burst from the trees onto open ground, spurring their horses to a gallop. Behind them, Thornton and his men gave chase, their horses thundering in pursuit. The race continued across the moonlit prairie, with Ruby and Quinn gradually pulling ahead thanks to their fresher mounts. Just as it seemed they might escape, Ruby's horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole, nearly throwing her. The mare recovered, but the momentary delay allowed their pursuers to close the gap. A shot rang out, whistling past Ruby's ear. Quinn immediately changed direction, leading them toward a rocky outcropping that rose from the prairie like the spine of some ancient beast. "There's a narrow pass through those rocks," he shouted to Ruby. "Their horses won't fit more than single file. It'll slow them down." They reached the rocks and threaded through the narrow passage, the walls so close they had to ride in single file themselves. Behind them, Thornton and his men were forced to do the same, losing their advantage of numbers. As they emerged from the pass, Quinn suddenly reined in his horse. "Wait," he said urgently. "This is our chance." Dismounting quickly, he pulled his rifle from its scabbard and positioned himself behind a boulder that overlooked the pass exit. "Keep going," he told Ruby. "I'll catch up." "I'm not leaving you," Ruby protested, dismounting as well. Quinn looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Stay down." As Thornton and his men emerged one by one from the pass, Quinn took careful aim and fired at the rocky overhang above them. His shot struck true, dislodging a shower of rocks and debris that sent the men's horses rearing in panic. In the confusion, 2 of Thornton's men were thrown, and another's horse bolted back through the pass. "Now!" Quinn shouted, running back to his horse. He and Ruby mounted quickly and galloped away, leaving Thornton and his remaining man to deal with the chaos. They rode hard for another hour before finally slowing to rest the horses. Dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky with streaks of gold and pink. "That was too close," Ruby said, her heart still racing from the narrow escape. Quinn nodded grimly. "They're more persistent than I anticipated. We need to throw them off our trail completely." "How?" Quinn pointed to a river in the distance, its waters swollen with spring runoff. We follow that for a few miles, then double back and head northeast instead of due north. It'll add days to our journey, but it might lose them for good. The plan worked. For the next 2 days, there was no sign of pursuit as they made their way through increasingly rugged country. The tension of being hunted gradually eased, allowing them to enjoy the journey once more. On the evening of the 6th day since leaving Rattlesnake Gulch, they made camp in a secluded meadow surrounded by aspens. The night was warm, the sky clear and filled with stars. After dinner, they sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the fireflies dance among the trees. "When we reach my ranch," Quinn said suddenly, "what will you do?" Ruby had been asking herself the same question for days. I don't know," she admitted. "I have no family to return to. No home." Quinn turned to face her, his expression serious. "You could stay, not as a guest or a hired hand, but as more." Ruby's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying, Quinn?" He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I'm saying that in the short time I've known you, Ruby Everett, you've shown more courage and strength than most men I've met. I'm saying that I admire you, respect you, and—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm falling in love with you." Ruby's eyes widened at his declaration. "Quinn, let me finish," he said softly. "I'm not asking for any promises. I know we've only known each other a week, and these circumstances aren't ideal. All I'm asking is for you to consider staying, to give us time to see what might grow between us." Ruby looked down at their joined hands, emotions warring within her. She couldn't deny the feelings that had developed for this man who had risked everything to protect her, whose quiet strength and kindness had become her anchor in the chaos of the past week. "I've spent my whole life in one place," she said finally, bound by duty and others' expectations. "I never thought I'd have the chance to choose my own path." She raised her eyes to his. "But if I stay with you, it wouldn't be out of gratitude or necessity. It would be because I'm falling in love with you too, Quinn Garrett." The joy that spread across Quinn's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and promising. When they parted, Ruby felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her, as if pieces of her life that had been scattered were finally falling into place. "We should get some rest," Quinn said, though he made no move to release her hands. "We've got a long journey ahead of us." "And a longer one after that," Ruby added with a smile. They reached Quinn's ranch 4 days later. As they crested the final hill, Ruby's breath caught at the sight spread before her, a verdant valley cradled by mountains, with a clear river winding through it. A small cabin stood near a stand of pines, smoke curling from its chimney. "Someone's there," Ruby said, alarmed. Quinn smiled. "That would be Levi, my foreman. I sent a telegram from the last town we passed through, letting him know I was returning." As they rode down into the valley, a stocky, middle-aged man emerged from the cabin, waving enthusiastically. "Welcome home, boss," he called as they approached. "And you've brought company, I see." Quinn dismounted and clasped the man's hand warmly. "Levi, this is Miss Ruby Everett." "Ruby, this is Levi Johnson, the best ranch hand in Montana Territory." Levi tipped his hat to Ruby. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Everett." The boss didn't mention he was bringing a lady back with him. "It was an unexpected development," Quinn explained. Levi's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Well, I've got coffee brewing and stew on the stove. Figure you both could use a hot meal after the trail." The cabin was simple but well built, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a smaller bedroom off to one side. Levi had kept it clean and orderly in Quinn's absence, and fresh wildflowers sat in a jar on the rough-hewn table. "You're doing?" Quinn asked, nodding toward the flowers. Levi shrugged. "Figured if you were bringing a lady home, the place ought to look a bit civilized." After a hearty meal, Levi excused himself to tend the animals, leaving Quinn and Ruby alone in the cabin. "It's lovely," Ruby said, looking around at what Quinn had built. "I can see why you love it here." Quinn watched her as she moved about the room, touching the handcrafted furniture and examining the few personal items displayed on the mantel: a tarnished pocket watch, a daguerreotype of a woman who must have been his mother, a carved wooden horse that looked like a child's treasure. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," he said. Ruby turned to him with a smile. "It's far better. It was built with love and hard work, not obligation and debt." She crossed to where he stood and took his hands in hers. "I'd be proud to help make it a home, Quinn, if that offer still stands." In answer, Quinn pulled her gently into his arms and kissed her a kiss full of promise and the future they would build together. Epilogue. 3 years later. The sound of children's laughter floated through the open window of the now expanded cabin as Ruby put the finishing touches on a birthday cake. From outside came Quinn's deep voice, explaining to their 2-year-old daughter Margaret how to gently pet the new foal that had been born just days earlier. "Not too hard, Maggie," he was saying. "That's right. Just like that." Ruby smiled as she carried the cake onto the porch, where a small gathering of friends waited to celebrate Quinn's 35th birthday. Levi was there, along with 2 new ranch hands and their families, and even Sheriff Collins from the nearby town of Riverbend. In the 3 years since they had arrived at the ranch, so much had changed. The single cabin had grown into a proper home with 4 rooms. A large barn now stood beside a corral filled with horses. Cattle grazed on the hillsides, and fields of wheat and corn stretched to the east. What had once been Quinn's dream was now their shared reality. Word had eventually reached them that Mayor Thompson had lost his position in Rattlesnake Gulch after a territorial investigation into corruption. Silas Thornton had moved on to Colorado, his reputation in Wyoming tarnished by revelations of his behavior. As Ruby set the cake on the outdoor table, Quinn approached with Maggie in his arms, the little girl's copper curls so like her mother's glinting in the sunlight. "Is that for me?" he asked with a grin. "Unless there's another birthday boy around here I don't know about," Ruby teased. Quinn leaned down to kiss her, eliciting good-natured whoops from their guests. Maggie squirmed to be put down, eager to join the other children playing nearby. As evening fell and their friends departed, Ruby and Quinn sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one above their valley. "Happy?" Quinn asked, his arm around her shoulders. Ruby leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought them here from a violent confrontation in a dusty saloon to this peaceful homestead filled with love. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in that saloon that night." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "I don't believe it was chance, Ruby. Some things are meant to be." As if in agreement, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the sky above them, a celestial punctuation to a love story that had begun with an act of courage and blossomed into a lifetime of happiness.